Here, Albert's here, and you know who else is here? My very good friend, former KGO talk show host, brilliant mind. He is John Rothman. Yay, John Rothman.
Kim, you
Woo!
didn't tell him about the drink that you now have a name attached to.
Yeah, the Kimikaze. It's the Kimikaze. I think it's vodka, triple sec, some type of lime mixture. And according to John Daly, who ordered the Kimikaze last night, it's pretty good. And of course, the Red Jack, all the money that they take in from these drinks, they kick into the show. The sign, if I had the sign, I'd show it to you. It says, it's our way of helping local talk radio that had to switch platforms. So we appreciate the Red Jack and what they're doing for us. And I love that I have that, the Kimikaze.
If I were a drinking man, I would drink a toast to Kim McAllister.
Well, let's talk about the tape. How do you not talk about the tape, right? The tape that seems even more damning than the transcripts, where Trump is waving papers around and admitting that he can't declassify things, and they're making jokes and as if it's nothing big to, flick around the nuclear secrets. But Trump now says this recording was merely bravado. It's all bravado, he says. He didn't show the secret documents. He says the recording of him talking about sensitive military documents just amounted to bravado. He says he claimed he did not show off anything classified when he said on the tape that he was handling highly confidential secret information in front of guests. Oh no. He talked to ABC News a day after CNN aired that tape. And he says, yeah, it's bravado. And I don't know if we can play this video for John, Albert, but there's a response from a lawyer who says, bravado, that's your excuse? If your excuse is bravado, what you're saying is you're an admitted liar. Joyce White Vance went on television and was talking about how bravado is really the worst excuse of all. That I don't know if we can show the video, but what do you think, John? Do you think bravado is going to work?
No, he's in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And he's in deep trouble because he talked about secrets. He talked about nuclear facilities. This is not the first time he's done that. I would remind you, when he was president, he received intelligence from the Israelis, which he then relayed to the world, and severely embarrassing a lot of people in intelligence. So I think Donald Trump is in deep trouble, and I think the fact that he keeps talking about it gets him in deeper trouble. And if I were his lawyer, I would tell him to keep his mouth shut.
Right.
The real problem is that he doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut, and it's too late. It's on tape. So I think Donald Trump is going to have real problems. And we have not yet heard from the January 6th report that is coming from the Justice Department. We have not heard from Georgia and what's happening there. So I think Donald Trump has a lot of problems. What's interesting to me is this blind faith that at least 30% of Americans seem to have in him, and tragically, evidently over 70% of Republicans. And that to me is a real tragedy. But all of this will be aired, and he does have a court date, although it's flexible. I think August 14th is the date. And we'll just have to wait now and see. But this has not been a good week for Donald Trump.
I have another piece of video, Albert, that I'm hoping we can show, because it really goes to what John Rothman is saying. And it's Liz Cheney talking to CNN, and I'm sure you've seen what she had to say, but she's talking about how we are basically electing idiots, and that, America has to smarten up and wisen up here. We're in trouble. Why is America electing these people? Let's take a listen to what Liz Cheney has to say.
And in our politics is create a situation where we're electing idiots. And
yeah, but she's not joking. It's funny, but it's not, right?
And so I don't look at it through the lens of is this what I should do or what I shouldn't do? I look at it through the lens of how do we elect serious people? And I think electing serious people can't be partisan.
We're back now with GOP
Yeah.
presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson. Some
We
laughs
can
there in the room.
go. We can leave Asa Hutchinson. But yeah, I wanted to play you what Liz Cheney had to say. And
Let me tell you, I
yeah.
love Liz Cheney. Her
Yeah.
book is coming out. Let me be clear, I would never vote for her because we disagree
No.
on too many issues.
Right.
But the American people are not electing idiots. We are electing people who have a particular ideology. And that ideology is being reflected in Donald Trump and his popularity. These are not dumb people. These are not idiots. These are people who have decided to ride a political crest which Donald Trump heads. And I think that is the problem. We do need good people to run for political office, but I just want to point out, to run for political office is a very complicated situation. You've got to raise money. You've got to be able to keep your supporters behind you. And one of the great things that happened, and I think it's one of the most important things in recent days, is the decision by the United States Supreme Court on a 6-3 decision yesterday to throw out all of these conspiracy theories. What is a marvelous thing about what the court did is that they really nailed Donald Trump and John Eastman and all of the conspiracy theorists and said, no, we're not going to accept that. So I'm an optimist. You have to understand, I don't believe people are idiots. I believe that people believe in someone, but it's like dating. You may think you've met the perfect person and then you get to know them. And what I'm hoping is the American people, at least the Republicans, will get to know Donald Trump more intimately and understand what a fraud and fake he is. He's really the Elmer Gantry of American politics.
I have to believe that people really don't like Trump. They really don't like Lauren Boebert. They really don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene. They really, didn't like Gates. That they understand who these people are, but vote for them despite the ridiculousness of the candidate as a person, because they know that they will vote for the policies they want. Right? They'll put these justices up there. Trump will put these justices up there that align with, what their stance on abortion and, taking rights away from people and what have you. I would like to think that we all understand that we're electing idiots, but we're doing it for a purpose.
Kim, look at Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, who on January 6th denounced what happened and blamed Donald Trump, then went down and kissed the ring in Mar-a-Lago. And now is caught up in a situation where he was very honest. He said Donald Trump would not be the strongest Republican nominee for president. Donald Trump's people hit the roof. Donald Trump hit the roof. What did Kevin McCarthy do? He picked up the phone to apologize to Donald Trump. We have a spineless Republican Party.
Yeah.
I was fascinated this morning to hear Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House and the Republican nominee for vice president with Mitt Romney back in 2016, who was very clear, not 2016, sorry, 2012. Let me correct myself. It was fascinating to hear Paul Ryan say, we just can't do that again. And frankly, there are Republicans like Paul Ryan, like John Boehner, former speakers of the House of Representatives, who understand the situation, but they are reluctant, for whatever reason, to tackle this incredible situation in the Republican Party. They should be battling for the soul of the Republican Party. And I would never vote.
Natalie writes, there are people that do like them because they are willing to say that quiet part out loud. Views that others often feel but aren't courageous enough to say. The closet racists love them.
Yeah, there's no question about it. But we have to continue to pursue the truth. That means that we have to call it for what it is. Donald Trump is somebody who should never again be president. I don't think he should ever have been president. But this is a man who clearly, when it comes to national security, is completely irresponsible. We have to recognize that we may disagree with an Asa Hutchinson, who is at least a Republican candidate for president, who is standing up and saying that Donald Trump has no business in the White House again. So those are the kinds of voices that need to be heard. How do you explain the polls? That's a whole other question. And I want to again reiterate what the Supreme Court did by a 6-3 vote was to put down these election conspiracy theories, or even the thought, as John Eastman said, that legislatures can overthrow the will of the people. This is constructive. Now, let me also point out that Kim, before we speak again next week, and I'll be with you next Thursday, not next Wednesday, because I'll be up in Oregon, and we're going to do it for, Thursday when I get back.
Yeah.
I just want to be crystal clear. The affirmative action case is coming down. The odds are, if you believe the speculation, that the Supreme Court will put an end to affirmative action. But let me also point out that people thought the Supreme Court would put an end to this case as well. The justices, I think, are doing what the Chief Justice has asked them to do. Reflect on the issue, but also reflect on history. We saw in the Roe decision, the decision to overturn Roe, that the Dobbs decision, that the Supreme Court was not, I think, thinking rationally. It was a 5-4 decision. So the court does divide. We have to wait now and see what happens on affirmative action, which will come this week. It'll probably, and I'll be talking about it on my podcast as soon as it comes down,
You mentioned election officials, and there's a couple stories I wanted to talk to you about because one of them includes the Georgia top election official, Brad Raffensperger, who today is going to sit down with federal investigators involved in the investigation into the 2020 election scandal and Donald Trump's attempt to overturn it.
And they have tapes. They have tapes, which you have played and I have played. Donald Trump. Go ahead. Sorry.
So he's likely going to be asked about this phone call where the former president asked him to find enough votes to beat Joe Biden in the state. That's not all, though. And, I think because you saw people like Raffensperger stand up and say, I'm not going to find votes for you. I'm not going to do this. Well, now there's a spotlight on a little elections official in Wisconsin. They have deadlocked on the reappointment of their elections chief in what is really a key battleground state. The top election official, her name is Megan Wolf. She's the administrator of the Wisconsin Election Commission. She was targeted by Republican lawmakers and conservative activists after the 2020 election, after Biden kind of flipped that swing state, Wisconsin, on his way to the White House. Her term was supposed to end on Saturday. And there was a stalemate, kind of a deadlock as to whether they were going to reappoint her. And it looks like some of the 6-member panel voiced support for her. Some people didn't want her. And so they have deadlocked on whether or not to reappoint her. She is nonpartisan. She has not stated whether, what party she's for. But I think that with everything that happened, especially with Raffensperger and other election officials, now these positions are really being looked at, and they don't want somebody who's neutral. They want somebody who's going to go to bat for them.
That's what the Republicans want. Let me point out to you, in Texas, the Attorney General, Paxton, who became a great advocate of this election fraud business, is about to lose his job. He will be impeached. He has been impeached. He will be convicted, I believe. There is, I think, a sense of decency. People may agree, and let me state it clearly, people may agree with Donald Trump or the conservative Republicans, so-called conservative Republicans, on issues, but they mustn't accept these kinds of attempts to subvert American democracy. And that's why the Supreme Court decision on a 6-3 vote yesterday was so important. It could have as easily gone the other way. And let me remind you, on the Supreme Court, you are not required to recuse yourself. Clarence Thomas, who has been, he's married to an election denier, it's unbelievable that he is allowed on the court. He ought to be removed, but you can't remove a sitting justice of the Supreme Court unless you impeach them. And only one justice has ever been impeached, Samuel Chase, back in 1805, and he was acquitted by the Senate. So the process here is very important. But now we know the deep-seated prejudices. And that's why, and I really mean this with every ounce of my being, and those of you who listen to me over many, many years know I've said, it matters who is president, because the president shapes the court. It is the president who nominates not only the Supreme Court, but the district courts and the appellate courts. So we know that it makes a difference who is president. And if, for instance, there were vacancies today, those vacancies would be filled by nominees of Joe Biden rather than a Donald Trump, and it would make a world of difference.
Yeah.
But that's why this affirmative action case, which I come back to, is so important.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court for a moment, though, because
Sure.
there's a new push by Democrats who have written a letter delivered yesterday calling on the Supreme Court to, for a Supreme Court investigation into allegations of the ethical improprieties against Justice Clarence Thomas. They want
Yeah.
ethics reforms to prevent this type of violation in the future. Makes perfect sense to me. Why aren't there rules covering this? And how does this go anywhere, do you think?
Okay, let me be clear. It's not only Clarence Thomas, it's Samuel Alito, who is also having serious ethical problems. There was a case of a Supreme Court justice. His name was Abe Fortas. He was nominated by Lyndon Johnson, not only to be a justice, but then there was an attempt by Lyndon Johnson to have him become Chief Justice, succeeding Earl Warren. That did not succeed. But in the end, Abe Fortas in 1969 resigned from the court because he had received $20,000 from a man named Wolfson. And Wolfson was an old friend of his, giving him money, and there was an ethical question. And the Republicans and the Democrats agreed that Abe Fortas should leave the court, and he did. The court has to do it itself. Remember that the various branches of government make their own rules. That means to say that the House and the Senate make their own rules about how they treat their members. We're going through this now in the House and in the Senate, particularly in the Senate, because you have Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, who is blocking all of the Defense Department nominees. And now there is a rebellion, if you will, among the senators to rewrite the rules, because what this guy is doing is so disruptive. The power that each branch has to police itself is what's critical. If I were John Roberts and I wanted to leave a lasting legacy, the ethics will not come from the Senate. The Democrats have proposed an ethics bill for the Supreme Court. That's not going to fly. What's going to fly is when the Supreme Court itself adopts its own ethics rules, and they should go back to the Abe Fortas case and take a hard look at it. If you apply the same standard that was applied to Abe Fortas, to Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, both of them will be off the court.
Well, are they want to do that, though? I mean, how likely is it that someone's going to enforce a rule or enact a rule that would allow them to not take the fancy trips, not get the money, not have their nephew's school paid for?
The court itself will have to make those rules. Yeah. It will not come from the Senate or the House. It will come from the Supreme Court itself. And I happen to think that the decision yesterday, the 6-3 decision, was critical because John Roberts, I think, even if I disagree with him on many issues, is a highly ethical person, and he understands that it is the Roberts court. And I think he's looking at his legacy, and I think other justices are going to do the same thing. It is clear that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito do not want an ethical standard there, but a majority of the court can make those rules.
Let's flip over to Israel. Earlier this week, I was reading a story that Israel is going to increase its housing expansion in the West Bank, something that we know causes problems and tensions, right? And so now today there's a story out of CNN that's Antony Blinken is telling, says the U.S. told Israel violence with Palestinians could actually jeopardize normalization with Saudi Arabia. So the unstable nature of what's happening between Israel and Palestine continues to threaten that region. Can you talk a little bit about the housing expansion and how this is all playing out?
Sure, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that you talked about housing expansion right here in Northern California. We face a situation in San Francisco where they want to build on the old Garden Center out in Sunset, a huge tower. There's no question. Housing is a critical issue. It is not the settlement issue which is the problem in Israel. The problem in Israel is that the Palestinian leadership still reject the very right of Israel to exist. They view Tel Aviv as a settlement. So I do not believe that settlements represent an obstacle to peace. What you have to have is an agreement that Israel is a permanent part of the Middle East. By the way, the expansions are taking place in existing settlements which no Israeli government will dismantle. But I think it's an excuse. The real question is not whether Palestinians have rights. They do. The real question is whether Israel has a right to exist. And yes, to create housing, and yes, to do all the things they want to do. At the same time, Palestinian rights have to be respected, and they need a leadership that will take that stand. Let me point out to you, there's a huge problem now. Mahmoud Abbas is a very weak Palestinian leader. He's in his mid-80s. He is certainly, he's not even technically president because his term expired so many years ago. They won't hold new elections because they're afraid. They're afraid that Hamas will win Palestinian elections in the West Bank. Remember that Hamas controls Gaza. The Palestinian Authority does not control Gaza. So it is a highly complex situation. But I want to emphasize that Joe Biden believes very strongly in a two-state solution based on an independent Palestinian state, and that the Palestinians view settlements as an attempt to subvert that viewpoint. Right. I would also remind everyone that Israel withdrew unilaterally from the Gaza, withdrew its settlements, withdrew its settlers, and the idea was a quid pro quo, that there would be a peace agreement. There is no peace with Gaza. Hamas controls Gaza. So the lesson the Israelis have learned is when they pull back, they are viewed as weak. But I happen to believe very strongly that in the end, Israelis and Palestinians are going to have to learn how to live together. And that means
how that works out.
Well, it does work in certain areas of Israel, and it can work, and that's what we have to work for. Because if we don't have that, there'll never be peace. It'll be a perpetual conflict, which may be the case anyway.
This region so much better than I do, but when I think about how why the Palestinians are so upset over these housing settlements, I kind of think in my mind how it would be if the United States just decided to go into Canada and start building, subdivisions in Canada and say, well, this now is part of the United States.
It's not the same thing. It isn't. Remember that Israel is an independent country, that it occupies or controls a territory which they acquired in a war. Let me remind you that a peace deal was struck with the Palestinian Authority. In return for no more terrorism, there would be a retreat. And the Israelis did withdraw from various parts of the West Bank. And what were they faced with? More terror. And the same thing applies in Gaza. They withdrew completely from Gaza, withdrew all their settlements, all their settlers, destroyed structures or left structures for the Palestinians, which the Palestinians then destroyed. The Israelis are caught on the horns of a dilemma. But let me be very clear.
Why would they want to go back and resettle those areas or build more housing in those areas when they know it's a contentious matter?
Because they're already there. You can go onto the West Bank, or which I've done many, many times, and these are existing settlements. You know that Jerusalem, it's very interesting. If you go to Jerusalem, there are Jewish neighborhoods, there are Arab neighborhoods, and both keep growing. But you can't eliminate the fact that these are areas of growth. So my suggestion really is that we need to have two sides who are willing to talk. And if the Palestinians came forward, and they will not under Abbas or under Hamas, to say, okay, we're willing to cut a deal with you. They've been offered deal after deal. All you have to do is read Bill Clinton's memoirs about the final negotiations he had in 2000 as he was about to leave office. And Arafat, who was then the leader of the Palestinians, rejected it all. And all you have to do now is take a look at what Hamas is saying and, frankly, what the Palestinian Authority is saying. The bottom line is, as long as the Palestinians refuse to accept Israel's right to exist as a nation, Israelis have no interlocutor with whom to make peace. So it's a serious conundrum. Joe Biden is conducting an admirable policy. He is saying, okay, we want to deal with the Palestinians. And let me point out to you, as Anthony Blinken condemns Israeli expansion, I'm waiting for the Biden administration as well to condemn the violence that comes from the Palestinian Authority and from Hamas. It has to be an even playing field in terms of those kinds of discussions. So that's really the bottom line. Israel's right to exist cannot be put in jeopardy in order to guarantee radical Islam and Hamas their rights as well. It's incompatible.
John Rothmann, I adore you. Before we go, I want to talk a little bit about your podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothmann. I know you say to Google it, but can you tell me what podcast platforms that your show is on?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
It's right there. All you have to do is Google "Around the Political World" with John Rothman, and it
Okay.
springs right up. And by the
Okay.
way, we're also now putting my segments with you and Mark up as well.
Oh, look at that.
And people can go to it. I give about under 10 minutes, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, my observations. There is a caption under each broadcast to explain what the broadcast will be. And I'm having a lot of fun doing it. I regret, and I want to say this very clearly, that there can't be more interaction. I miss call-ins. I miss the vigorous debate. I miss that vigorous discussion. But we are doing our best, as you are, and
Yeah.
Mark is doing, to try to make what we had something that is still available to people. And so that's our goal. Around the Political World with John Rothman, 5 days a week. I record about 7:30 in the morning, and it's posted by 9 o'clock.
This is awesome. So something for people that are missing you, that really want to hear what you're thinking about issues of the day, a great way to catch up with John Rothman.
And you can see at the bottom of your screen, they've actually put up the
I
information.
know. Albert,
So-
he's good like that, you know.
Yeah, Albert, 3 cheers for Albert. And may I say, next week, I will not be here on Wednesday. I'll be here on
Yeah.
Thursday. You guys are being very flexible because of my travel schedule, but I want to extend to everybody a happy 4th of July. Whatever faults we have in this country, we have a lot to celebrate. And the Supreme Court gave us something to celebrate yesterday. Let's see what they do by the end of the week. And that may be the topic for next week. Kim,
Well, John Rothman,
a
safe
toast
travels.
to you.
Thank you for being here. Always grateful to have you. And we'll see you next Thursday.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.